With that, it's 5:30. Let's call this work session to order. The first item we have up is the long-term financial plan and our 2022 enterprise fund budgets. Mr. Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. So this is something our kind of entire team has been working on for several months. As you know, we looked at part one at your last work session, kind of the capital plan, and I printed that out here. This is something we're going to be kind of referencing different pieces to this tonight. So if you ever wanted to kind of quickly reference a project or a year, you have that in front of you. So we reviewed year by year our projects, and then tonight is kind of the second half of looking at what that impact is to our tax rates, our utility rates, connection fees, so on and so forth. And so Steve McDonald, that I think everyone knows with ABDO, is here tonight to kind of walk us through that. I'm just going to kind of kick off a little bit more. This plan is effectively our capital plan that's embedded within it. We look at infrastructure related to utilities, so water and sewer, stormwater, but also streets, street maintenance we have in there, capital equipment, so equipment in public services and the fire department. Something new this year, we integrated the street maintenance plan, not yet adopted, but the kind of the framework of that proposed plan, as well as our hiring plan, which you'll see, or which we reviewed at the last meeting. One of the things that I did want to point out is, and you'll see this, we noticed as kind of Steve kind of built the plan that our current rate structure for stormwater, so related to like fees that we bring in, won't be enough to kind of satisfy kind of the expenditures related to stormwater. So we've in the past been prorating costs, so a task performed in public services or kind of someone's overall position, 50% goes to general fund, so parks, streets, buildings and maintenance, so on and so forth. And then there's a water function, a sanitary sewer. In some cases, we've been appropriating, let's say, like 5% of that employee's time, so salary, wages, to stormwater fund. We had planned for a little bit in our capital plan to have the certified levy project funded through the stormwater fund. At the end of the day, there's not a big enough revenue source. I mean, without, you probably have to quintuple, the rates in order to kind of fund that level of expenditure within the stormwater fund. It's not built like the water and sanitary sewer. And Steve can get into the detail of that, but I just wanted to point that out that that's a shift. We have enough to kind of cover debt service, enough to cover the general operations, so cleaning up stormwater ponds, the equipment related to that, but we don't have the budget capacity or the fee structure in place to run it like we would our water and sanitary sewer. And so in essence, the general fund and water and sewer subsidize that in some ways. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there because you'll notice that in kind of the detailed financials, but you also notice that in our updated capital plan that we moved out all of our stormwater kind of prorated pieces with the exception of a $50,000 levy contribution that we have on an annual basis to try to match funding resources as they come in until we build towards the larger project. Any questions on that before we move on?
So we can handle the $50,000 annually for the levy project,
Yes.
but not the percentage of the salaries?
Yeah.
Okay.
So with that, maybe Steve, I'll just turn over to you just to give a kind of general overview, and we can kind of run through some of these slides, and then maybe your general impressions of where fund balances sit and kind of long-term projections, etc.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks. Good evening. The good intro there. The thing with the long-term plan is it really is focused on key performance indicators around cash, how much you have, where it is, what it looks like 5 years from now, bonding, what our current amortization looks like, plus what new debt model looks like, and then with taxes, the total amount, a tax rate comparison, what does that look like, or how would it apply to properties in your city, and comparative with a few other comparable cities. So those three things are the big picture of what we hope to summarize and give you knowledge about what things look like over the next 5 years. I guess on page 4 of our long-term plan, we go through the assumptions. These assumptions drove the results of the plan. So with operating expenses, we assumed a 3% inflation increase. And then the table at the second bullet shows the assumed positions and what year they'll come
You want me
in.
to skip? I'll just skip to that assumptions page.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you want me to go through it in a different way.
No, this is perfect.
So we put a line item in the oh, there it was up above. We put a line item in the tax calculation to quantify each year's effect of those new positions being added. So you can see in 2022, the Public Services Tech, Finance Director are anticipated with a total salary amount. And then 23, 25, and 26 have other positions added. So total, when everything is added up, it's 500,000. Now those ones you do in 2022 will increase for each of those years, but that's the total of the positions as we know right now. Housing growth also is a key driver of the results. It affects the overall tax rate, it affects your connection fees, and ability to pay for some of the growth in the enterprise systems as well. So 21 through 26, you can see it ranges from 190 houses per year to average of about 120, 125.
Are those conservative estimates, Brad?
I think they're more towards, I wouldn't say they're conservative, I think they're realistic.
Okay.
In the past, we've underestimated, but I think as a consequence, sometimes that can impact our fees to a greater degree. So we think these are good numbers. Obviously, you can't guarantee them. They're subject to a lot of different indicators.
So when we look at the permit tech admin position, I mean, we're tying that into the expectation of the new housing, correct?
Yeah, I would say not just with that position, but with every position, it's a planning based on that housing. But if housing dips, or if there's some other condition within our team that it doesn't make sense when we're looking at that budget for that specific year, we'll say, we really don't have that need anymore, or it's changed. And I would say just anecdotally looking at our past plans, the staffing plan has changed every year just based on what we know today or knew at that time. I think we would have all collectively thought it would be foolish to plan for 190 homes in 2021 and 2018. It just didn't seem realistic. So to your question, yes. If we're dropping that down to like 50, 60 homes a year, then for a permit tech is going to probably drop. But we might, end up saying, it's pretty clear that the residents want more communication, so we might end up pushing that communication specialist up because we're just spending an exorbitant amount of money with Bolton and Mink doing, project communications, graphics, that type of thing.
Okay.
Okay. Population estimates, what we're using for a population estimate, because it triggers the per capita numbers that we have for taxes and debt. That's around 5,600. And then capital plan identifies sources of funds as bonding, grants, or reserves. So we take an approach of doing the sources and uses of each fund and determining what's going to pay for major expenses in each. And I think in your finance plan, there's some indication of where those funding sources are. Let's see, A couple of things in the debt service funds on the next page. The Fund 345, the Mills bond, projected the last TIF is this year, but then you have that outstanding special assessments of 1.8 million. Those aren't modeled as being collected because you don't know when that's going to happen. Let's see, the Fund 112 and 116 is your capital equipment improvement fund. There's assumed bonding for the projects identified: public services storage, the County Road 40 turnback, turnout gear addition, and 3rd Street Bridge. That's 2.6 million. And then the certified levy project is budgeted entirely in that fund as well, 3 million. One of the other key transfers is that road state aid is expected between 250 and 300,000. We use 250,000 starting in 2022. And then in the Park Development Fund, a couple things to note there. We have projected 1.8 million in dedication fees, and there's a $2.5 million city park in there where sources aren't identified for that at this time. It's not assumed to be bonded. Okay, and then street maintenance fund is established, and an annual levy is assumed to fund the operations in street maintenance, and that ends up, we'll see it climbing over the 100,000 transfer was done this year, and then that levy amount does increase each year. Okay. Next page, high level, you can focus on the percentage increases in the water, sewer, and storm. In this long-term plan, with some of the projections that you've had.
I'm going to just move to this sheet. I think it'll be easier for them to follow.
Okay. So the water rate structure is identified up there. Now, when you were around last year, we had proposed a 5% increase in 22 and 23, and then a 3% leveling off. Looking at the cash balances in the long-term plan, a 3% increase is sufficient to generate a working capital reserve that's adequate to fund the operations. So that certainly has been discussed a lot over the last couple of years, and now with the way that the cash balances project out, it hits a reasonable working capital target.
So I have a question about this. We hear a lot about the price of water as compared to larger communities around us. So are we just, at what point here does this start to come down and level off? It seems like we're just keep going to this water fund to fund everything that we're doing, and the prices just keep going up and up and up when we're hearing from residents that water is more expensive here than they're finding in other communities. So is this going to be the way Carver is that our water fund funds everything and we just stay high? Or are we going to start to level down to where some of the other communities who are a little bit larger are?
Well, Brent, I'll let you answer.
When you say it funds everything,
Well, we use our water fund to fund a number of things, don't we?
all water related.
It's all water related? Okay. So we don't borrow from this fund then for other things?
Well, like loan, but every loan that we have, I don't think we have a loan against the water fund right now.
We don't. Okay.
But when we have in the past, it's paid back with interest.
Okay.
So it's a cash flow thing. And then I would, and one of the things we can do as an addition to like your point about other cities, I think the comparison, it depends on who you compare to. Like, and it probably would be a good analysis for us to do. You'll see it for taxes in the general fund budget, but we're often compared to cities that we shouldn't be compared to, other than they're close to us physically. Chaska, Chanhassen, Eden Prairie, Victoria, that are double, triple, quintuple our population. Just from, working in the community to the west and knowing other managers in those communities, our rates are consistent with a community that's 5,000 people. It's just, that's not where the inertia or the gravity is pulling. You tend to compare to the services and the taxes that are in communities to the east of us, not the west of us. I would say at some point it levels out where we tend to take on more of the characteristics of a community that's 20 or 25,000 have water rates comparable to Chaska, but I would say that, I mean, if you just look at where our comp plan projections are at, I think it's 2040, we're planning for 19,000. So that means, you know, it's gonna take another 15 years for us to be even in the ballpark of where Chaska is. But, you know, if there are things related to like how you want, you know, the capital plan is a reflection of these rates. That said, like, it's 100% water, so kind of the field of vision for discretionary spending is different than the general fund, where you can choose not to put in a certain park or delay a street. Some of the water stuff, you just kind of have to do because it's either quality or it's not. You can't let a pump go like you could a street for obvious reasons. So that's kind of, at least from a policy perspective. I don't know if Steve, you want to answer from a financial.
Yeah, from a city this size too, with like water treatment infrastructure and all of those things, it ends up being more expensive at this level than it will be when you grow and the population can support it. A lot of it can be driven by outstanding debt right now more than operating expenses.
But I think one of the things we could do is, you know, that peer group that we tend to look at for salaries and, you know, development related, we could do a sample bill at 8,000 gallons and say, okay, this is what our peer cities charge, and I mean, if there's an outlier where we say like, well, why is this different? Then it's worthwhile to then identify what the major difference is. So for example, you'll see in the general fund later, I think we're comparably matched with all our peer cities with the exception of 2 cities, Minnetrista and Medina. And if you think about what is different about Minnetrista and Medina compared to Jordan, Delano, Carver, it's tax base, right? And so that's the outlier. And so if we did that same analysis with water and we found like Delano is half the cost of ours, then it would give us the kind of impetus to call Delano and say, what are you doing that we're not doing, etc. So I think it's a good point, something we can dig into, but I feel that this is opinion based only, that the comparison just doesn't match up when we compare Carver to Chaska, Carver to Eden Prairie. And it tends to be, that's where our new residents are moving from, Eden Prairie, Chaska, Chan. And so it's kind of a little bit of culture shock on a different scale, on a different type, that like, why is water more expensive? Why are taxes more expensive? That correlation of like, I can get more home for the money. There's unintended consequences to that, if you will.
Nobody ever asks how much the water bill's gonna be before they close their house.
No. But if you could find just some of that comparison information, obviously, I realize that we're not going to be Chan or Chaska, we all know that. But just to see how we're comparing, I mean, if we're right on the money with everybody else, then great. And if we're way off, maybe it's something we can find out why.
Right, and it's a great question. It's like, water is just paying for water, you know, and that's, I think for the, you know, the average Carver resident, they're probably not thinking of that. They're thinking, I pay water, I pay property taxes. It's like, you know, even though they're kind of really segregated, you know, under our finance model.
Thanks.
Right. Let's see, sewer. Slide for that one.
If you just have the total rate, if you want to just kind of go over the projections, Steve.
Okay, that's on page 7, and a 3% rate both on the connection, 3% rate on the connection starting in 2023. 2022 projects a 10% increase in those connections to get it to $980 per connection. And the cash balance in the sewer fund, when we look at that, will be significantly lighter and closer to a working capital target. And then storm is a 5% increase from 2022 to 2026. Brent mentioned that as well, that stormwater had to do some reallocation of expenses to make that end up be a reasonable working capital target. it was originally projected to go almost negative with the operating expenses that you had in there for salaries and wages. Okay, all right, so those are the assumptions that were made. Maybe we can just go through the order
I have a
that you
question on
have.
this one.
Yeah.
Is this built out for 5 years too, or is there a reason we don't do that? Is that in a different slide?
Oh, this one, I think that's,
Okay.
Yeah, there's in the.
It's come, okay.
Well, no, in the plan, there's a projection out for 5
Okay,
years.
all right, I just need to flip back to that. I thought I saw it, but okay.
yeah, those are 5 years. So all the funds, we have a 5-year projection on.
Okay, thank you for pointing out where that was.
Okay.
And it, wasn't all too long ago when we were talking about, before the water plant was constructed, we were talking about water connection fees that were around 12,000, 13,000. So give yourselves a kind of collective pat on the back for, taking another look at that and working with Bolton and Mink on how to design that water plant to work more efficiently and using different resources.
Okay.
Any specific plan questions for Steve? If not, I'm gonna just kind of run through some of the slides and then use Steve and Chad as kind of resources, Aaron, Schmidt, perhaps, depending upon the question.
Can you, Steve, just go a little bit more into, you talked about the park dedication and having an unfunded amount for that park. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, if you look on
15, is it?
page 15, if you look at 14 first,
Okay.
and it's small, but yeah, the 3 items that are projected capital spend are the currently your JCP project, the Ironwood Park in 2022, and then Downtown Park. Those are the capital items that are listed to be funded out of the Park Development Fund. So now if we go to the next page, that's the sources and uses. And if we look for 2021, 2, 3, well, all the way through 25, the dedication amounts are identified each year. So I think that mentioned that adds up to about 1.8 million. And then on the expenditure side, you can see that in the culture and recreation line, that will correlate to the CIP. So the 650,000, $1.5 million, and the 2.5. There's no bonding anticipated. So if that downtown park project would go, it would need some funding source because otherwise we would end up $1 million short. So
Because we're not getting enough in park dead to cover that. Okay.
For the year that we want to construct it in, not
Got
because
it,
of.
okay, like you've said before, got it. Can you help me understand, just explain why the park dedication fee isn't more consistent? Is it because it's paid when the developments come in and that can be, okay.
And there are a couple other, for example, within this model, we don't have the second phase of Carver Crossing departments, and they pay per unit. So that would be a windfall to park dedication.
Okay.
And with, when we looked at the Song property or like tonight, the Hammers property, that speculation is hard to kind of understand when a certain piece of property is gonna fall. So, kind of going back to your question from the last meeting there, I think that $1 million is, I know it's $1 million is a lot of money, but it's within the range where you have options to like try to fund that, and I know the council, has talked about not wanting to do a bubble, but depending upon how close you were, you could maybe do an that's where you could maybe do an interfund loan knowing that you were gonna get, if you knew you were gonna have a big park or a big development project in 2027, that was gonna come in with 500,000, and you're like, oh, well, let's do it in 2026. We know that we're gonna have $500,000 in additional cash in 27, and we're gonna do an interfund loan for the balance. I mean, although it seems like a short amount of time, 2026 is a a long ways away from understanding how our development is gonna go. You look like you have a question on this mean looking me right now.
It's not a long ways away. Blink.
No. Okay.
Thank you for explaining that
Yeah.
again. I'm hyper-focused on, concerned about not having enough money in Park Dead, because I know one of our neighboring communities is kind of working through that, so.
Yeah, the way that I think about it, Aaron has influenced a lot of this, is that park plan extends like many, many, many years. And we're doing a lot of projects in a short amount of time, so it's funding itself, it's just, we're not doing this some onesie twosie, like a playground here and a seesaw there. We're doing we're doing,
We're not doing onesie twosies.
we're doing close to $4 million in park projects in 5 years.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, and so it's gonna strain your that cash flow, and so it's just how aggressive you wanna be with it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. You wanna take it back to the slides?
Yeah.
And I think that the graphs really kind of highlight what we talked about in the beginning. It gives you a pretty good sense on what's really happening. With all of the details we talked about, it's hard to get a picture of exactly this one thing, how does this affect this? There's a lot of detail that's in here. And so when we look at the total, we get a good sense on what is really the incremental change from where we are right now.
So I would kind of, to Steve's point on this, kind of the first line on tax rates. This is based on all your plan components and inflation and the hiring, et cetera. But you're still, every budget you're going to be but you're going to be in a position to kind of deal with what the needs of the community are at that given moment. And so what this does is hopefully prompts you to say, well, I'm uncomfortable in year 2024 because that's not the trend line I'd want to follow. So Councilmember McKnight brought up, that it goes back up in 2026. But that's kind of coincides with the certified levy project. And if we're putting $3 million back into the general fund as a debt service, if that's a pinch point or a situation where the council would feel uncomfortable, do you want to plan for a different year? And that's just taking that project, and segregating it out. You could look at any one project, that could, add to that. But if there are trends or kind of dynamics that you're not feeling comfortable with, not that you have to decide this project stays or goes right now, as far as like approving it, but those little pieces that you can make those little changes that can start to influence, because you probably realize that as we get closer to plan years, the planning document kind of has more will. It's like, well, this has been on our plan for 5 years, we need to do it, and so now's a great time to say, I don't feel comfortable, or I'd like to see this move there, I'd like to see a stronger fund balance in water before we take on this other project, etc.
Well, the other thing that's nice to know is that this takes into account the market value growth in the city, and then as you pay off debt, it shows opportunity as well too.
Right. So if we're looking at the 2026 proposed debt levies, is there any reason that we should be wary or uncomfortable of seeing that larger proposed debt levy? I mean, when it comes to our bond ratings or anything like that, is there a reason that we should feel uncomfortable with that?
I think it's all having a plan and putting it in place. That tax rate's staying about very close to the same from 25 to 26 in a 3-year trend of, I guess a 5-year trend of a decrease. So my experience with bond rating agencies is that that's not going to get them excited or apprehensive about maintaining a good bond rating. It's okay to have those increases when you have it aligned with a project that we planned for and future funding sources that we can afford. I think that's the long-term look of these things. Our general fund, we have a fund balance target, which is the red line, is it 40 or 50%? I can't remember. 40. So you can see in 2021, you were above working capital target, which is a positive thing. And really what isn't modeled in here is that we have the 3% increase in expenses each year. There isn't a 3% increase in the fund balance. The fund balance is projected to stay break even. So as your expenses go up, your working or your target moves down a little bit. So that's why it looks a little bit off from 2021, but it's still where you want it to end up.
Steve, is that target something that we're required to have or we've chosen to have?
You chose.
Okay.
It's enough to pay the bills through the end of May. That's the
Okay.
40. That's the magic in the 40%.
Okay.
But there's an audit, state auditor standard, isn't there?
Yeah, state auditor talks about 35 to 50%. Bond
Okay.
rating agencies say 35 to 50. And it really does come down to, can we pay the bills for 5 months if we didn't have any revenue?
Okay.
So this is kind of this would be an overview of the rates based on that financial plan. There's a completely separate process that Vicki leads related to updating our fee schedule and rates on an annual basis. And then, so we are kind of looked at this slide, so I'll skip it, but we did a comparison on 8,000 gallons now, and then based on what that sample bill would be based on the plan's fees, so $3.79 increase. And I know there's holes in this analysis related to gallons of water because it's, you pay for sanitary and storm, but I do think it's worthwhile mentioning, because I do it all the time, is the 79-cent gallon, jug of water, which most people would find affordable, but the amount of water that people can use for a relatively, cheap cost is really phenomenal. It's like, comes out of the faucet, you can, use it on demand. And so granted, yes, there are other cities where you can find it cheaper, but just kind of the whole kind of idea of providing water to the community and the work that goes into it for 8,000 gallons at, just over $50, I think is pretty amazing. Connection fees, we reviewed already. And then this is just a kind of a review. It's embedded in the plan, but Kathy had put together these schedules related to what debt service that you have in each of the enterprise funds. So the most significant being water, and then followed by sanitary sewer. The interesting thing, just kind of in that comparison city trend, I was just talking to Jesse Dixon, the city administrator in Kelowna. They're looking at a major upgrade to their sanitary sewer plant, so they're not involved in the Met Council. So if you think about where Kelowna is, it was probably Carver 10 years ago, and with the expansion at 212, they're going to be in that same position where likely Kelowna residents are going to be saying, why is our water so much more expensive
I
than
moved
sewer?
here from Carver.
Compared to
I have
Carver.
pay.
So it just, I think, provides a little bit of perspective. And then stormwater, and Chad can probably speak to this better than I, but it just feels kind of from the outside looking in from how involved I am with the stormwater, that's such a, there's so many rules and regulations related to how stormwater is managed and maintained and moved from one pond to the other, related to our MS4 permitting and rules and regulations. And every project that it seems like we do has a major stormwater component, whether it's a pond, whether it's a pipe system. I don't know, Chad or Aaron, do you have anything to add to that? No? Yeah, great.
I agree, there's always, with every development, there's always, a pond or some type of construction related to stormwater.
So just thinking out loud, stormwater is the area that you said that we were a little short-ish, or kind of refiguring things out to make the math work.
I would say it's short based on the business model that we're using. If you want to fully fund like storm water, you'd really have to supercharge the costs associated with that.
Okay. Weren't we talking a couple weeks ago how we were gonna start to come up with a plan for the stormwater ponds and then the emails that we've received from our friends in Spring
Wildwood
Creek,
Glen,
Wildwood Glen, yeah.
So that's part of,
Is that assumption in here, money for that?
yeah,
Okay.
it covers that. As we continue to develop and grow, there'll be more ponds to maintain. So one of the parts is, you know, every so often you'll have to remove sediment from that pond. Well, that's a cost. We just don't, we do like one pond a year, is that about right?
As far as
Removing sediment or maintenance?
dredging, it's spotty. I wouldn't say we do one a year. Typically, they're 20 to 25 years before sediment removal.
When you, at some point, you'll get to a point where you're gonna wanna do, if it's one every 2 or 3 years, you'll get to a point where you're gonna wanna do 2 a year, because if you don't do it, like streets, if you don't
Right.
do it on this plan, then all of a sudden you're gonna fall behind, so. I'm not feeling that stress of we don't have enough money in the plan to do that type of work.
Okay.
We don't have money in our current rate structure to fund the percent of time that Chad has 3 people from his team working to cut the grass and do the sediment removal, but we have enough for the hauling fees and the electricity to run stormwater lift stations, et cetera.
Okay.
So if you wanna change that model, we'd have to change the fee structure.
You saying you're confident with the, where we're at is enough for me, so thank you for explaining
You wanna talk a little bit about this slide, Steve?
Yep, yeah, so this is a question that comes up, and you kind of alluded to it a couple of times. Where the money is and what you spend it for. This takes all of the cash in the city and stacks it for the 5-year projection period. And then we've identified by really major buckets, I guess we'll call it that. So the enterprise and capital and working capital is the purple. So that's your water, sewer, storm all added together. Our capital project fund, so the reserves that you have outstanding for park development, street maintenance, capital equipment, that's those. The debt service funds, that's the cash balance projected in all of your debt service funds. And then general fund is that, the blue bar at the bottom. So that shows over that 5-year period, you look at where the increases and the decreases are. It's your capital projects, that's where things drop from 25 to 26 as you spend reserves for projects. Again, one of the benefits of doing this plan is that you're building reserves to spend for projects. It gives you alternatives rather than we have to bond for everything. I think this is I think it's a more effective use of city funds to plan for this. But you know, again, like bonding's an important tool to have in place as well, but this just shows we can pay for the projects that we have outstanding.
So that's kind of, the process steps would be feedback from the council tonight on, you know, changes, you know, comments on rate structure, et cetera. And then we would, once we make those changes, we take it to a regular meeting for you to adopt the plan.
Comments, questions, feedback? I think it looks good. I appreciate you kind of going through and answering our questions as we were going through there. I don't know that I have any feedback or anything in here that I want to take out or add in. I appreciate that there's money for the certified levy project.
I think a critical piece is to remember this is a living document, if you will.
Yeah.
So it's, every year it's gonna change based on market conditions, growth, how much water we're selling, et cetera. Changes in needs for staffing, changes in needs for equipment. But what it does is it gives you a snapshot to say, okay, I'm comfortable with these trends, knowing that you make a decision during budget time, again, on these items. And then, you know, in almost all cases, on like these larger expenditures, like buying equipment, you make another decision at a regular council meeting to move forward with plans and specs, awarding bids. You know, so there's multiple phases to these projects. You're not approving anything but a plan by taking action on this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the tax rates over the next 5 years are so evenly going, and nothing is going crazy. Nothing is significantly changing year over year. it shows also that we have some, I'm gonna call it wiggle room for whatever changes in the next couple of years, something blows in and we gotta bond for something, there's room. There's a little bit of room in there, right? If we wanna move up certified levy, cause we can, like we, there's room. And I like that this plan has so much in it. We've really been really thoughtful to be inclusive of what we think we need, but yet it looks so stable at the top level.
Good. I'm good.
I'm good.
Good, all right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Moving on to item number 3, the draft 2022 general fund budget. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
So a lot of this stuff will be the same, so I'm gonna breeze through those slides and then kind of concentrate on some of the changes that you may have noticed. So kind of the step that we're at right now is kind of getting ready for our September 20th meeting. If you're ready to set that preliminary levy, if we need to schedule a special meeting, we'll do that. But I'm gonna get into there's a question related to assessed value, I think the mayor had at the last meeting, so I talked to the interim assessor, and there's a ton of different scenarios depending upon when someone starts construction, when someone's finished construction, so that's why it says in general. But you can kind of see where we're at, it goes from vacant lot where it's land value only, and even there's kind of a wrinkle where, the land is probably, as a kind of a farm field, is gonna have one value, but once it is developed into lots, that lot is gonna be worth more than if it was a part of a, bigger 80-acre piece. It continues to be land value only when the home is under construction. There is a kind of a break-off piece up at some point during the year where, it could be a prorated amount of like half the amount of the value of the land, or 100% of the value of the land, and maybe 50% of the value of the building, depending on where they're at in construction. Typically, when you're kind of finished, you get that mid-year home finish. Your next year's taxes are still going to be like, partial home value and land value. It's only when you got that 1 year under your belt, you're going to get that full land value and full home value. And so, for probably new homeowners to a kind of a newly constructed house, they'll typically get that first year taxes and think they're going to be at, $1,000 a year, and then the next year it triples because it's the full value of their home. And so this is just a snapshot of that.
You missed the slide before that, that was also new.
Yes.
And
taxable
I
market
love
value.
that,
Me too.
because we look at
Oh.
population a lot, right? But that doesn't tell you the whole story, right? Because it's more than just population. How much commercial, industrial value, this is
Yep, so this is,
total.
it's not an accident. Yes, there are plenty of drivers that make up where a budget is and where taxes go, but if you compare this slide to where communities are at for city taxes, it's pretty much the reverse order as far as highest to lowest taxes as well. And so it's probably a little bit of a good highlight to like how important it is for us as a organization to try to develop a tax base, not just with residential, but with commercial and industrial, et cetera.
Few surprises in there.
I know, I guess I didn't realize how much more has been Chaska. That was surprising to me.
So is it the market value of like every acre in that city, or is it just residential? Is it
It's everything.
residential?
Total tax base.
Total tax base.
Right, so like at the Ridgeview, that entire property is tax exempt.
Okay.
Excuse them? No. Oh, sorry.
So would this include Fleet Farm and, why am I blanking? Lakeview, thank you. Even though they're TIF and, okay, that's included.
Yes.
Okay.
This is value. The kind of the
Versus-
step below this is tax capacity, and then there's net tax capacity.
Okay. Okay.
Really
For
want
the
to
next
know,
time.
like, you can look at that later.
I'm probably
Look
good. Look at the
at
time, we only
This
have
is
half an hour
It's
left.
a great chart. Keeping on, yeah, moving on.
We looked at this slide before, so fiscal disparities, this is an update, so it happens that we got that information almost instantaneously after our last council meeting. They still didn't have like all of the information, but the state said we're gonna publish it at this amount, so this is the amount that we'll end up getting, related to fiscal disparities, and so leads into kind of the overview of the draft 2 adjustments. So we certified the fiscal disparities at that 366,000. We made additional budget cuts related to professional services. We, ultimately some of those things are what they cost, but we think we might have overestimated. And so related to like legal and engineering, we cut back a little bit. So that reduced our preliminary levy from 12.5 to 11.9. Reduced the estimated tax rate from 48.5 to 48.12, and decreased the increase on an average value home by about $10. So I'm going to get into a couple of these, I think, slides specifically related to taxes are interesting. So again, this is before I get to that, I'm just going to touch on it again. This is kind of the spotlight. Obviously, there are many, many areas that you can choose to look at, but these are some of the higher dollar items. If you want to start talking about cuts in different areas.
Brent, on this one with the pie chart,
Yeah.
this has bugged me since the last one, the pies aren't even. It's not lined up. It's not lined up, right?
What?
If you look at the blue, it's nothing. It's just. We'll talk about it later. It's just something to look at. The information's correct. The pie is not. It's shifted. We're making too big of a deal.
Yeah.
Move on.
Here you can see the change in the general levy history. Again, that's taking out the street maintenance. So it's gonna drop because you're taking out $120,000 of street maintenance as its own levy. This is kind of a more close-in view of a look at that. But you can see the kind of the shift from draft 1 to draft 2 as it relates to general debt service and street maintenance. Obviously, street maintenance and debt service have stayed the same. And then here's the calculation. So if you look at that market value, just a kind of a brief commercial on the tax capacity, the market value, in order to create tax capacity, depending upon like if it's residential, it's like typically 1% of the market value. But then like on a tax increment property, that capacity that's created from that value is taken away and put into a separate tax increment financing district and separated. So
Okay,
that's what's referred to as net tax capacity.
got it, thank you.
You impress your friends with that.
You don't know my friends.
So again, that $93 decrease, and then looking at, if your home went up by that average market value increase, what would that impact be? You're around $150 increase. Now that's, again, average. Some homes might have gone up by more than that 2+%. Some homes might have stayed flat. Likely to go up if you finish your basement, did a bathroom, did a building addition, added a shed, etc. So here you can see kind of the new comparison based on that draft 2. I think this next slide kind of related to Councilmember Mock's comments related to kind of how do we stack up. We like to compare to Carver County cities, but these are the peer cities that we've used in kind of other projects, other areas, primarily related to our salary study for employees. But here you can see how we stack up with cities that are more or less our same population. And I would offer that probably, at least Minnetrista and Medina, you saw in the previous slide how much more additional tax base Victoria had. So again, still plenty of work to do, but this, and it's an old narrative, but when I first moved to the community, there was this narrative that Carver had the highest taxes in the state, based on some article that was published in the Tribune many years ago. Well, that's obviously not the case, and has never been the case. But, you know, when you say Carver has higher taxes compared to Chaska, that is correct. But is it higher taxes compared to other cities that have our general characteristics of population, tax base? You know, maybe another question to answer. And then this is kind of a history of where we were at compared to where we're at now. And so it's our previous slide on this was kind of more zoomed out. This is kind of more zoomed in into Councilmember McKnight's request on kind of the values. You can see that the trend is going down now. Is it, you know, as fast as, you know, some people may want it? You know, that's up for the council to decide and kind of direct. But I think at the end of the day, it does give you kind of a bird's eye view of where we're at, where we're heading, and if that's acceptable. Do you feel strongly about that, and in what direction we should go from where we're at right now? And then updated levy option scenarios. So we're at the 11.9%. These are just 3 scenarios to get you down to 9, 6, and 3. The corresponding tax impact, you can go a variety of different directions, but it gives you some type of sense of what it would take by change to the general fund budget to get to that number. So that's just a general overview of the changes. A lot, you know, 99% of the budget has remained the same. So again, this is another opportunity for some comment, feedback to staff on questions related to line items, etc. If there are none, then we would prepare the preliminary levy resolution for September 20th meeting at this draft 2 level.
Questions, comments? I think it looks good. I appreciate that you guys took the feedback from, what was that, 2-3 weeks ago? It was a while ago. And tried to sharpen the pencil a little bit more on some of the fees, so I appreciate that. I think this looks like a good budget. It gets us everything that we want. I'm really proud of us for doing the street maintenance program, because I think that that's something that if we don't do it now,
We'll pay for it.
yeah, it's gonna be so far behind, and we could argue that we already are a bit behind than some of our older but not that old streets, really. So I think this looks good.
We're not having to bond for it.
Yes.
For big giant projects,
Yes.
right?
And I think that that's,
It's just in the budget.
Yeah.
I like that a
and
lot.
it's a more equitable way of doing things than the franchise fees that we discussed a couple of years ago, so.
Yeah, no, I'm good too.
I'm comfortable with it. Good.
Just let it sink
Chrissy?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
in. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Brent. Okay. No more questions, comments. We are gonna move forward with this as our 2022 budget with a
Preliminary levy.
preliminary, yes, I'm
Not to
sorry,
exceed.
yes. With our not to exceed number that we will discuss again on September 20th. Great.
And then we kind of glazed over, but just wanted to check in. There's not as much detail on enterprise fund budgets. Is there anything within those budgets that was concerning? It was in those slides, a lot of those costs are kind of fixed, but just wanted to kind of highlight that opportunity should there be any comments.
Nothing for me.
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. Can I keep going?
Yes.
So just kind of a segue, I'm gonna ask Aaron Schmidt to give the council an update on an item that potentially could hit your agenda on September 20th. Some really good news related to well construction. Well 5 and 6 might just end up being one well. So Aaron, you want to take it away?
That's good, because that lead-in
That's
made me
not the
nervous.
money.
Yeah.
Skyway well you're telling us about?
Yeah, yep. So some good news, yeah, I mentioned a few meetings ago that while we were drilling well 5, we noticed that we hit the Jordan aquifer above us, which we were thinking at the time when we spotted well 5 that we were kind of right on the edge. It was maybe a possibility, but we didn't have enough confidence to really go for a Jordan right away. So now we've done a little more research, and we're confident that we want to drill well 6 as a nested well right next to well 5.
Explain nested.
Yeah.
On the same site. So a nested well configuration is you have 2 different confining aquifers at different elevations in the same location. So you can actually drill one well into one aquifer and then the other one into the other, because you have to seal the layers between the well when you drill the casing. So you can't let water from one aquifer essentially drain into the one below it and drain it out dry. So when we drill the Prairie du Chien below it, we'd have to seal that layer anyway, so the water in the Jordan aquifer is still there. So
it's essentially one shaft and it's 2 tiers?
no, it'll be 2 different wells. So if
Yes.
this is
Yeah, can
well,
we make sure?
this is well 5 that we just
Get out the tinker's
we
noise.
drilled this summer, right?
Yeah.
We're literally gonna move over 20 feet and drill another well right
Okay.
next to it.
Okay.
But deeper.
Less
More
actually shallower.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
actually shallower on the same side. So we'll be sitting here like this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what was our original plan for the Jordan Aquifer? Was it at a totally different location?
Yeah, so originally we were thinking the Jordan Aquifer, it's generally west of us. So as we look at additional well capacity in the future, like in 10 or 15 years from now, as the city develops west, we're thinking that's probably where our next well field will be.
Okay.
Out there, like west of Fleet Farm, you know, out by the outpost, somewhere out that direction. But we caught the Jordan in this spot, so.
So that does mean that we have less infrastructure to get to our water treatment facility, right? We don't have to go as far, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of where Brent was getting at. So a huge cost savings potential here. In the original budget we had programmed, we had figured that we'd have to drill another well on a completely different site, so there'd be site improvements associated with it, another well house, additional raw water main piping just to get back to that larger 12-inch raw water main we put in along 212. So all this now is really, really close to all the infrastructure we just installed. Yep.
Can you give them that
Wow.
number that we're talking about for savings?
Yeah, so in our budget, we've programmed 1.6 million for well 6 and the associated improvements with that. And we're thinking that well 6 could happen for around 600,000 right now.
Oh.
So
What
there's-
did you say again? Wait, I need you to repeat it, please.
Yeah.
No, honestly, I need you to repeat it.
So
It's not getting in here.
we had programmed 1.6 million in the
Okay.
budget. And we're thinking we're gonna probably come in around 600,000 for the well 6 work.
Okay.
So that's $1 million.
So what do we do
job.
with that? Awesome. It's
Yeah.
awesome, but what do we do with that? Where does that money?
Don't spend it?
No, I know,
Yeah.
but where does it
Who
sit?
sees the savings?
Where do
Where
we
does it
return it to?
So it,
Turn it to somebody, do we reallocate it? What do we do with it?
so it has to be spent on water, so
Okay.
it sits in the water
Oh, we
fund.
have plenty of.
So either one of 2 things will happen. One, if you don't spend it, then it goes toward debt service, so paying the debt back off
Sure.
on the loan, if you will. The second option, which is probably preferable, is this spending it on water-related items
Yeah.
in your capital plan to mitigate your need to bond in the future. Say, okay, we're gonna, pluck off,
Yeah.
a couple of these areas here, so that we don't have to bond for it and take out additional debt, so.
The
But it sits in the water fund
public services storage
until you
building.
make that choice, so. It won't get absorbed into,
Okay.
the fire department fund.
Sorry, Cal.
Cal is going, 3 new trucks.
I thought it was my new ladder truck.
I was looking at the
No.
public services storage
There's
building.
water on the
There's water.
I think that you can get a ladder truck for only $1 million.
I
That's, okay, all right. Anything else from the city manager's report? Council requests? I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So,
A motion by Councilmember Henry
I'll second.
and a second by Councilmember Mock. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?